Hi, my name is Tejasvi Narahalli and I'll be presenting the FC 2021 talk on time-locked bribing. So this talk will piggyback on the idea of minor extractable value because MEV is kind of the current interesting trend in blockchains, especially DeFi and Ethereum. We will see how whether MEV is actually also possible in Bitcoin and whether that's actually a threat to any sort of transactions or any sort of smart contracts or platforms that we are building on top of Bitcoin. So the general idea is that rational or malicious miners could modify transactions or include transactions or inspect and include transactions or change ordering of transactions or exclude transactions. We see in Ethereum that modification is not possible because most transactions are actually signed and can only be spent by the user. And unless the cryptography is broken, transactions cannot be modified. Including a transaction by the miner without any sort of relationship with other transactions is as if the miner is a user, so that's kind of also fine. It's not really including or getting any value out of the inclusion itself, which is beyond what is available from the transaction itself. Inspect and include, on the other hand, is much dangerous, much more dangerous because the miner could actually see the transaction coming in from the user and then front run or back run the transaction to extract value out of the transaction itself. This is a major area of research in a lot of the DeFi ecosystem, and we will not get to it in this particular talk, but it's an interesting area to watch for. Additionally, also miners could change the ordering of transactions, and that also will have an impact on the stability of the system. And we assume that while changing the ordering of the transactions, the miner is able to extract some value out of it because a transaction appearing before or after something might actually lead to certain outcomes for the miner. Of course, the miner also could exclude transactions from the pool itself, from the block that they are mining. And in our current talk, we will focus on this because this is, I think, the most important one in the context of Bitcoin. So as I said, in Bitcoin, we don't know if it's possible that inspect and include can be done, or even ordering can be done. Of course, both of them can be done, but the question is whether they have any value to the miner themselves to be able to do this. If they change the ordering, for example, can they extract more value than what they are getting from fees at all? If they inspect a transaction and try to front run a transaction or back run a transaction, do they get any more value? In Bitcoin, mostly smart contracts are not like smart contracts in Ethereum, where they have an independent existence. In Bitcoin, transactions are just transactions, and it's very unlikely that there is a transaction where a miner could front run something and be able to get some value out of it. On the other hand, we claim in our talk that transaction exclusion is pretty dangerous because the miner could actually suppress a transaction and not include it in his block, and in that way get some value out of it for themselves. And we will see how that is possible and what sort of systems that are built on top of Bitcoin are vulnerable to this kind of an exclusion-based MEV attack. So one classic example of a Bitcoin transaction that is used in many systems like atomic swaps or lightning channels and escrow transactions and vaults and a bunch of other ideas is the notion of this HTLC, or a hash time locked contract. So an HTLC looks in like this in the Bitcoin script pseudocode. So you have the value of the HTLC itself, which is the amount of Bitcoin locked in the HTLC. And then there is two branches under which this can be spent. One is the spender who controls the public key 1 will reveal a pre-image for this particular hash, which is a secret pre-image, and will be able to spend this particular branch and get money out of it. Or if the public key 2 owner waits for a bunch of minutes or seconds or days or whatever is the delay function here, then they will be able to spend that branch. So the first branch goes like this, and it is spent by the public key 1's signature. And the second branch will spend this with the delay happening, and then the signature of the second party is also there in this transaction. One thing to notice here is that the value which is being extracted from each of these transactions is, in this case, in the first path, we are assuming that the value is going to be all going to the owner of the public key 1, but a small fee is left for the miner. In this case, we will come up with a kind of contrived situation where the value is entirely 0, and the public key 2 owner is letting the miner take the full value of the transaction. Now, why are we saying that the second party does this? And we will see it in the next slide as to why it is interesting or useful for the second party to let all the value accrue to the miner instead of taking it for themselves. So this is a typical exchange which is performed when HTLC is used. So HTLC is committed to the blockchain. In the case, the buyer, we call a role of the first public key a buyer. He gets some sort of a service from the seller. And this service is in the real world. So it could be a coffee, it could be some sort of a movie, or it could be anything which the seller cannot really recover back from the buyer after the fact. And after this particular thing is done, or during this thing is happening, while it's happening, the buyer also hands the pre-image of the hash to the seller. And with this pre-image, the seller can now broadcast the first transaction, which is going to give them the value of the HTLC. And now, if the seller does this, or if the buyer has handed out the pre-image to the seller, the buyer should ideally do nothing and just, because the buyer already got the value in terms of the service from the seller, and the buyer should really just go away. But what if they broadcast TX2, which leaves all the value to the miner and none to the buyer? Of course, the buyer is not getting a direct benefit from it, but if the buyer leaves a value epsilon for themselves, the rest of the value minus epsilon goes to the miner. And that's kind of where the miner extractable value comes in. And we will see, because both TX1 and TX2 are visible to the miner could decide to wait for TX2 and not mine TX1. So if they mine now, because TX1 is valid now, the miner gets F in fees. If they mine later, because the TX2 is valid much later after the time lock T has expired, they get the B in bribe. But the key thing is, both of them cannot be mined. If TX1 is mined, TX2 becomes invalid. And if TX2 is mined, TX1 becomes invalid. But of course, TX2 cannot be mined earlier because it is actually locked with a time lock. And that time lock is a consensus rule in Bitcoin, and that cannot be violated by the miners. So if TX1 is ever mined by any miner, not just the miner that we are thinking about, or like any miner, if TX1 is taken in by their block, then TX2 becomes invalid immediately. So what happens now? What will any rational miner do? Will they mine TX1 now and collect the fees, or will they wait for TX2 and hope to collect the bribe B? In our insight in this paper is that it depends on their hash power. And that's kind of what decides whether the miner should decide to mine now or mine later. Of course, we make a bunch of assumptions around these results that we're going to present next. One is that the miners are rational, in the sense that they do what is the best strategy for them in terms of getting more payoff than less payoff. And mining hash power, a share of all the miners, is common knowledge. It means that every miner has some idea as to what their share of the mining total global mining power rate is, and what is the general composition of the mining rate of the entire pool. This is interesting because this can be actually done to some extent by analyzing the blockchain and figuring out which mining pool is creating which block. And this is available sometimes through the signature of the mining pool, which is placed in the Coinbase transaction. So we assume that this kind of gives the miners ability to figure out what is their share and other people's share in the global hash rate. And the most controversial assumption of our paper is this time lock transactions are seen by all miners. And this is a tricky one because Bitcoin Core, the main Bitcoin C++ client, doesn't actually relay transactions if they are time locked. But we assume that miners are connected to all parts of the network and they're able to see all the transactions that are emitted by all the users. And sometimes transactions accelerator services will enable people to send transactions to miners directly. Okay, so to figure out why a miner would wait or not wait, we define this idea of what is a strong miner and what is a weak miner. So we know that the fees of a transaction is much lower than the actual bribe that was being left behind in the bribing attack. So let's assume the fees by bribe ratio is some sort of a value, and we assume that a miner is strong if they have more than that percentage of hash power compared to F by B. So let's assume that the fees is 1 Bitcoin and the bribe is 100 Bitcoin, and F by B is 1%, and a miner is strong if the miner has more than 1% hash rate. And we assume that the weak miners have less than F by B in terms of hash rate. So one case that we want to analyze first is what if all miners are strong, which means that all miners have more than 1% or F by B hash rate. So what they could do is they could refuse the bribe. If they refuse the bribe, it means that they have a chance of uh, getting the fees in the first set of blocks before the time block expires, or they have a chance of getting the bribe based on their hash power to get the last block. So this stands for the T plus first block, and this is the blocks till the time block expires. So if they choose to wait, they get this one, and if they choose to not wait, they get this one. So their expected payoff is XF plus 1 minus X times P and B. But because P is greater than F by B and the odds of them mining any block is greater than 0 here, we see that the expected value which they accrue if they wait, which is P times B, is less than the expected value if they start mining upfront. So this shows us that the bribe actually works if all miners are strong. What this means is the miners' expected payoff if they wait, if all of them are strong, is more than what they would get if they don't wait. So if all miners have a reasonably high hash power and the F by B ratio is pretty small, then independent of the time block itself, this attack will always work. And that's a bit scary in the sense because we really cannot increase F by B to a large extent. And if all miners are strong, then there's nobody who's really mining the valid transaction before the time block expires. So let's see what happens if some miners are weak, because that I think is a more interesting case. So we'll say one miner is weak and they will refuse the bribe. They'll actually, say that I will take the fees while it's valid. So what they will do is in the time before the time block expires, they try to get F with a probability X because they might not actually be successful in mining any block before that. Or at the block T plus 1, when the time block expires, they get the bribe with a probability T, which is their mining hash power. And this has to be done in this specific block because at T plus 2, we can assume that the bribe transaction is taken by some other miner. So we know that PB is less than F. And we know that if they try to get the block up front, get the transaction up front, and if they don't succeed, it doesn't preclude the second outcome. What that means is if the miner is trying to mine the valid transactions but are not successful, they can always do the second part as well. Because if they're not successful mining any of this, then nobody else is successful mining any of this, then this is still valid. So we know that outcome 1's attempt doesn't preclude outcome 2, and that's a good thing for the miner. So for them, they know that the reward for refusing the bribe P is greater than the reward for following the bribe PB because of the way weakness is defined. So if one miner is weak, we can see that for them, refusing the bribe is actually a better strategy than actually waiting for the bribe. Then we kind of try to analyze the situation where one miner is weak and the other strong miners actually know that this weak miner exists. So in our paper, we actually prove this result where if the time block value T is greater than this particular expression, then even the strong miners will now realize that they cannot wait for T plus 1 to happen to be able to get their payoff because their expected payoff at T plus 1 is lower than their expected payoff before T elapses. And this proof is a little bit involved and it's actually in the paper. So please, I would encourage our viewers to read the proof to get kind of a hang of this particular interesting result. So if this particular situation happens to be true, if T is greater than log F by B by log of 1 minus PW, where PW is the hash power of all the weak miners, or in this case, one weak miner, then strong miners will refuse the bribe from the first block itself. And that makes it very good for us because now the bribe is effectively useless. So now the question comes down to whether there are weak miners at all. Are there any weak miners in the Bitcoin blockchain? So we did some analysis of the blockchain itself to figure out what is the share of each of the mining pools and independent miners, if you will. And we found that there are quite a few weak miners, and it goes on and on. The more blocks you analyze, the more you find, obviously, because sometimes random blocks are mined by one-off miners. But even if you keep the number of blocks you analyze to be a reasonably small number, you do get many miners who get less than 1% of the share. So this kind of gives us hope that if F by B is around 1%, then the situation is very good for us because there are many miners who have less than 1% hash power. So how do we use this information? How do we harden all these protocols that rely on HTLCs to make to get them to be better using this particular insight about weak miners? As we can see, F, B, and T are all HTLC parameters, so they all can be tweaked so that this equation holds and life is perfect. So Lightning, specifically the Lightning Network, has a bunch of bold proposals which give you default values for all these parameters. And incidentally, Lightning allows you to have what is called a channel reserve Satoshi balance on each side of the channel. And that is fixed to 1% right now. So 1% of the value of the channel is actually held by each party without that balance ever moving to the other party. So if 1% is already given to us as the fee to bribe ratio, Lightning currently fixes T at 144 blocks. And we posit that based on our calculations, it should be T equals 212 blocks for it to be safe. And at T equals 144, we still have some vulnerability to this particular attack. In atomic swaps, if T is set to 144, then we expect the users of atomic swaps to set their F by B to 0.1 instead of 0.01 or something, because that way they know that if they wait for T equals 144 blocks for the swap to go through, then they will be able to, if the fees available for the victim is around 0.1, then they can defend themselves against a bribing attack. In our paper, we also kind of modify the atomic swap structure from the classic TR-no-none swap, which is in the case where we have two blockchains and the hash is released on the second blockchain to take the swap on the first blockchain. So for that, we modify the construction to give this risk-free atomic swap, because in an atomic swap, there is no intrinsic value held by both sides of the transaction. So the person who initiates the swap always gets the benefit. So to kind of mitigate that, we have a construction which solves that. And this is also present in the paper in a much more detailed flowchart and a block diagram. So the paper contains other content, obviously. We also eliminate dominated strategies of strong miners, and we come up with even more aggressive bound for the time lock. We show the risk-free atomic swap construction with all the details of transactions. And we discuss a bunch of related work in this area of inclusion or exclusion attacks of transactions. There are some attacks on temporary censorship based on third-party smart contracts like Ethereum. There was a paper which was concurrent to our work called MAD-HTLC, which tries to give another construction of atomic swap or HTLC, which solves this problem. Then there are some other ideas of transaction pinning, which comes from the RBF proposal in Bitcoin. Also, there are other attacks like fork attacks, where if a transaction is buried in the blockchain with some degree of finality, are there ways to fork the blockchain to make sure that the previous transaction is invalid and a new transaction becomes valid instead of that? So these attacks are somewhat orthogonal to our question, where we believe that transactions which are specifically trying to suppress attacks which are trying to suppress one transaction is much worse than those which try to induce larger forks. So these related works are analyzed in the paper and compared against our construction. Anyway, the key insight of the paper is if you mine now, you have a lower fee currently available. If you mine later, you have a higher bribe available. But if the time lock of the HTLC is longer than this particular value, then the game is actually safe at T equals 0, which means that the bribe will most likely not go through. And with that, I will end the presentation. Thank you.